All right, welcome back to Just Another Solar Podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me, Karl Jensen. G'day, Karl.
Luke, how you going? Cold and smoky here, mate, in Melbourne.
Well, it's always something miserable over there, Karl.
Yeah, look, everyone thinks everyone's cold, so they light up their house wood heater type things, and dogs go outside for a pee, come back in smelling like a chimney.
And also joined by industry legend Nigel Morris from Catch Power. G'day, Nigel.
Got it. G'day, fellas.
Checks in the mail, yeah? There's a mention.
Perfect.
There's a fair bit going on. Nigel, just before we jumped online, you were talking about something really interesting that's coming in, dynamic EVSE control.
Yeah, that's right. So Queensland, they've had regulations in place for some time to manage the network impacts of the impending, tsunami of electric vehicles. In typical Queensland style, they probably were a bit overzealous and a little bit conservative in their approach, copped a lot of flack for that, and ultimately revised their regulations into essentially a choice of either a ripple controller that would turn your EV off if they decided they wanted to, or dynamic control. And up until now, there hasn't been anyone who has been able to do dynamic control of EVSEs until yesterday. Catch Power, in conjunction with Fronius and their Watt Pilot, were the very first approved dynamic EVSE suppliers into Queensland. So, from next week, we'll start seeing that ramp up, I assume, and we'll be able to dynamically manage the relationship between solar and load and EV charging and ramp systems up and down, ramp the charger up and down in the same way that solar's ramped up and down in dynamic control, but we're doing it on the load side this time, which is super cool.
I'm angry about it, Nigel, because we have the technology and it doesn't need any hardware, and it's called Charge HQ, and it's called Fronius, and it's called, a whole heap of different inverter manufacturers, solar smart charging. It's a significant cost that will drive people into shit EV charging solutions, which is plugging into their car in a 240 volt, 10 amp outlet. Yeah, I want to hear from everybody in the industry. I think that we should say, hey, look, we've got better technology than you guys are proposing. It exists. It's out there now. Why do we want to take all of these backwards steps?
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that right off the bat, Jensen, because it actually doesn't require any technology. You can bung a catch control unit in as a consumption meter, which you're going to need in the majority of cases anyway. So there's no additional hardware required there. We just happen to be able to talk to the Fronius Watt Pilot. You could probably take a guess that there'll be a whole lot of EVSEs that we'll be able to talk to in the near future. So you're going to have a consumption device in there. You need one to allow things to ramp up and down or limit them anyway. So there's no extra hardware there. And if you've got an EV, you're going to need an EVSE. So there's no additional hardware.
I agree. So you're doing it via existing hardware and some software. And
correct.
There's plenty of other people in the market that have got existing hardware and software, which includes people like Charge HQ, which talks to the car and uses the car to manage that rather than trying to manage the charger.
Correct. And if they were CSIP approved, like Catch Control, they'd also be able to take the commands from the network where it says ramp it up,
Nigel.
Ramp it up or ramp it down. But unfortunately, they're not, Karl.
But those requirements are coming in for inverters in a number of different states. So we've seen it in South Australia with their flexible exports. From the 1st of July in both Victoria and Queensland, there's a requirement for CSIP, which basically means that an inverter is able to be ramped up and down by the network.
Yep.
And that's mandatory from the 1st of July in Victoria and Queensland. So those inverter manufacturers who aren't there yet are going to have to get their skates on.
Yeah, that's right. This was a big topic down at Sea of Victoria where Karl and I were actually. We got to share a beer together and slap each other's backs in person for a change. And it was interesting because 3 of the 4 DNSPs were there along with a government representative, and they sort of stood up and talked about how exciting dynamic export control was going to be. Or they're starting with just a backstop mechanism, but it'll turn into dynamic before long, and what it meant for industry and everything. And then towards the end of their presentation, sort of just went, but we're not going to be ready. And 3 of the 4 DNSPs just kind of went, look, we know we're multinational DNSPs worth multi-billion dollars, but, building an admin system that can manage this, we couldn't do it in time. So we're not going to be ready till October. The rules are still going to come into play.
Then why make it mandatory? You're pulling the cart before the horse.
Well, indeed. And I'm intrigued that one of them could get their act together, but the other three couldn't. And they had to, bring along a government representative, to make them feel good about the fact that the government agreed that they weren't ready. I think next time they throw a rule at the solar industry, we should just go, yeah, no, we're not ready.
Yeah.
Give us another 6 months.
It's interesting. I got a phone call earlier in the week from Cameron at ProCam down in Geelong. And he said he had a customer who asked him to fix his supply because during the free period with OVO from 11 till 2, he was pulling 20 kilowatts of phase and melted the neutral out in the street. And the customer said he wanted to make things a bit more robust so this wouldn't happen again. He had to tell the guy, hey, look, the network really wasn't designed for you to pull 20 kilowatts of phase for 3 hours to do all of your electric stuff. And those kinds of price signals in the market, whilst being taken advantage of by people like me and that guy, I think that we will have an ability to use a lot of excess power during the day if we choose to. And the network operators give us the right price, i.e. free, or pay us to take it, then we can use a lot of energy.
That's exactly, as archaic as the Queensland approach is and how it sort of reeks of regulatory overreach, what I do like is the whole reason it's designed is to address that very situation that you described, Karl, where if the network is under stress, they can send a signal to say, sorry, mate, you can't have 20 kilowatts of phase right now. I'm going to ping you back a little bit to 15 kilowatts of phase or 10 kilowatts of phase or whatever it is. And from a holistic perspective, from a network perspective, that makes a whole lot of sense because there's a whole lot of stuff potentially going on, more and more complex stuff all the time. So that's what I do like about it is that we can avoid those kinds of problems potentially.
Well, yeah, and it could be dynamic. So there are days when it's negative 44 cents on the grid. We can all see that. And then there's other days when it's 40 cents, even though it's free with our retailer. We go, well, obviously someone's hurting somewhere if I'm pulling a heap of power.
And we're seeing online there's a lot of complaints going on because some of the retailers are going to negative rates, i.e. charging people to feed into the grid, the sun tax. So there's a fair bit of complaints around that. Standard feed-in tariff rates are dropping as well, Karl. You were mentioning beforehand.
So Victoria, the default offer rate is 3.3 cents a kilowatt hour. Obviously, the retailers have got an option to vary that one way or the other as it suits them. But that's a drop of 2.4 cents. So that's a lot, 40%, something like that.
Mm. And the word on the street is that, two things around the sun tax. Number one, thus far, the announcements that have been made are that it's voluntary. So I'm imagining there's going to be a rush of solar owners signing up for a sun tax. But I guess their goal is let's test it. Let's get the systems in place. Let's give it a year and see how it rolls out. And the other side of it is I think the penalty rate was 2 cents, 1.4 cents might have been. It was 1 or 2 cents. Wasn't very much for exporting at the wrong time. But of course, you're almost never going to see that because all that's going to happen is that's going to be taken off your export rate. So if you've got an export rate of 3 cents and the sun tax is 2 cents, you're just simply going to get 1 cent instead. So they're going to take it off the retailers.
You know what they call that, Nigel? They call that Western Australia. Minuscule rates, minuscule.
Oh, yeah. But it will be interesting to see. I mean, all of these things that we're talking about, right, they're all about changing behavior, whether it's through pricing signals like the sun tax or like low energy rates or like incentivized EV charging rates at different times of the day or whatever it may be. They're signals to get people to change their behavior. And then you've also got these sort of backstop mechanisms, which are technical ways to get people to change their behavior, i.e. I'm going to turn your charger off. I'm going to turn your solar down. So it is really interesting after all this time that we are now starting to see a plethora of these signals. And I was actually reading an Electric Vehicle Council report today that talked about exactly this issue and a whole lot of trials that have been done. They actually cited about 5 different trials, some local, some international, that demonstrate that, you know, when you put the signals in place, just like Karl has proven, put a price signal in place, people will change their behavior. So, you know, the lights aren't going to go off anytime soon. It's either going to be through a price signal and voluntary behavior, or it's going to be through a technical signal that says, well, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it. Or it's going to be through automated control where companies like ours will say, now's a dumb time to charge your EV. We're going to reschedule that for you and do it later on because we know we can save you some money.
Now, we've got more points we can go through, but I'm impatient because we've got a really good guest today. So I'd rather bring him in so we can talk about his story. We can talk about the other points that we do have left. Huon Hoogesteger is the Managing Director of Smart Commercial Solar. So they've been around for over 13 years. Go to any trade show, go to any meaningful thing, turn on the media, and you see Huon's face. So now he's reached the pinnacle with just another solar podcast.
Welcome, I apologise.
It's all downhill from here.
Thanks for coming on, mate.
It's so good. I was looking back at our text messages, and it was about 2 years ago where I sort of ignored you the first time just because I was too busy at the time. But
I'm sure we've discussed it at networking. I've got this really bad habit of having a beer and going around the group and inviting different people because you hear all the good stories, but you've got a really unique and interesting story as well. So just for the listeners who aren't familiar with it, do you want to just give us a brief about your company and how you got to be in the industry?
Yeah, sure. My second oldest brother and I bought a property north of Sydney, about 1 hour, and we bought that in 2004. In 2007, we're building on it. It was going to cost us around 250 grand and in those times to connect to the grid. I was working construction. I'd studied explosives and then construction. A friend of mine at school, his father was in off-grid, Luke Williams, LJW Solar, started in 1982 in solar. And anyone who started in 1982 was either a hippie or just a hermit. And I think Luke was a bit of both. He installed a solar system, and then he was looking for a salesman at the time, and I was looking to get out of construction or start my own business in that field, and I took it as an opportunity. And so I went in those days, this was basically just before John Howard released the RET and put in place the very first $8,000 rebate for solar. And so I was just before the boom. It was just a wild ride in the domestic space. I'd drive halfway across the country to sell, an off-grid 2 kilowatt system with lead acid batteries. Yeah, it was great fun. I realized after working for him that I'd actually bought myself with the amount of margin that you could make in those days. It was like 100%, and I'd paid for my own first year of wages. So his gamble on me was pretty good. Yeah, so that's where I started in domestic, and by the end of working with him, I'd been there 5 years. We'd grown a team up to about 30 salespeople who were doing really well. But I had an issue with selling domestic as the rebates were coming off. I'd also developed a fairly detailed math-centric model, and I realized that no one was concentrating on commercial. Everyone was residential with a little bit of commercial if they could get it, but commercial...
There wasn't a huge commercial market back there, was there? What did it look like back then?
There was nothing. I think one of the landmarks was, at that time, I think the Johnson & Johnson building, which was 100 kilowatts, and that blew everyone's mind. Like, whoa, 100 kilowatts. That's unbelievable.
Indeed. It reminds me of the very first 15 kilowatt tri-powers that turned up in Australia, and I looked at my boss and said, who the hell's going to buy those?
Yeah. That was the day, but I developed this model. I actually had developed PPAs. At that time, no one was doing PPAs. I didn't know what a PPA, the acronym was, so I called it Pay-As-You-Go Solar. I was grabbing a coffee, as I'm a bit of a coffee addict. I was grabbing a coffee outside the office at that time, and I said to a guy passing by, a business owner that I know, I think I've got a way of installing solar for free, and this is how it works. And he goes, well, if you've got a great idea, you do it yourself. It was just a hell of a time for me. The 60-cent feed-in tariff was coming off.
Were there any precedents? Like, did you model it? Obviously, people know what PPAs are now, and over the years, there's been different ones. Did you model it on one that you had seen, or was it just your own idea and concept you came up with?
Yeah, it's just purely, it was like discovering fire. I feel like Tom Hanks in that movie where he discovers fire and I've discovered fire.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. You look just like Hugh Jackman, and it's a pity people can't see you. So all I can think of, when are you going to lift your arms up and I get to see the claws pop out?
Yeah, look, you can Google me. But so no, I felt like I discovered fire, and I thought, this is going to be amazing. All the challenges at that time, high cost, solar cost a fortune, break evens were too long. No one believed in the technology. No one trusted solar guys, nothing's changed there. All the barriers to entry, no one knew if the product was going to work or last. And I said, look, to the businesses I was selling to, trust me, I will fund it. I will take on the performance risk. I will take on the capital risk. I will take on all the promises that I've given to you about product and how this thing's going to work for you. And I will put this system in for free because you don't believe it's going to work, but I do. And I'll sell you the energy cheap. And on that basis, I started Smart. And in those days, it was a very quiet existence. I sat at my kitchen table. I mean, I could write a country music song about this. I was going through a divorce. My dog had died. The 60-cent feed-in tariff was coming off, and I was cleaned out. You
got to write that song, man.
Exactly. So I started in one of the hardest times. At that time, it felt like one of the hardest times in the market. And in my personal life as well, it was interesting. 12 years on, here we are. Smart Commercial Solar is now, I think, in terms of volume, probably number 3 to AGL and Origin. I own
That's phenomenal for a private company.
Yep, I own it. There's a story there as well, but I've got a great team. We've got 54 staff. We work with about 60 contractors on roof any day. We work all over the country. We're now in New Zealand as well. We give away solar in Vanuatu, places like that. And we have a very positive impact. We've got customers like Bunnings. We've done 140 Bunnings out of 330 total Bunnings sites in Australia, as well as thousands. We service 20,000 individual customers with our service division. And I hope broadly that we both have a great reputation for our behavior, our integrity, and the quality of our work. But yeah, most of all, I've got a great team and we've got a great future as well.
Now, you mentioned taking on the risk of the installs. And I mean, that was a gamble at the time because the products weren't as consistent and reliable.
Yeah.
But even these days, what we've seen this week is that there was a fire at the Sydney Olympic Park Aquatic Centre. That's still being investigated, the cause. That was the first question I asked you when you came online, right? Was that one of yours?
Yeah.
But it's pretty big. We've seen a number of fires. That's one risk. Some of the performance stuff as well. I've seen some articles about how systems are underperforming versus what their longer term projections were in terms of generation. They might have used panels that were warranted, performance guarantee for 25 years and extrapolated that across their offer and what it was going to do. A lot of those older panels had issues with LETID, PID, and all these other things that brought it down. So how do you find that risk these days versus back when you were doing it then? And how can you navigate that challenge?
Look, I feel sorry for everyone who's had a fire. The reality is, that fire and what we do with solar it's a real risk. You can have the best quality system and still a faulty component. Over 13 years, we've had a number of fires. We've had a bunch of inverters that had a faulty MPPT, and that was the cause of the fire. We've had just 2 weeks ago, we had a fire where we believe it was a lawnmower or something in the area may have clipped a cable. Either way, it was a mechanical impact on the installation of some cables going into the ground on a large ground mount project that smoked. A month ago, we had a guy working on a combiner board. It was 45 degrees. Frankly, I think his brain was fried at that time. Everyone on this particular project was working really hard as a 4 megawatt tracker, 4.4 megawatt hour battery. One I might talk a bit more about later, but an off-grid project, and he reverse polarity one string and smoked the combiner board. Very embarrassing for him as an individual, obviously embarrassing for us with our client, and dangerous. And it's frustrating when it's human error. It's a little bit less frustrating when it's a product that we actually have no control over, but no one's immune to this. I don't think there'd be anyone who's been around for a while who hasn't experienced some form of fire. I mean, the challenge is just to do it better. I think, thankfully, we no longer have rooftop isolators. I myself had a rooftop isolator smoke on my roof at home.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. I was at a solar event. I was chatting with Rami from Solar Juice, and I go, I got to go. And I was out of there straight home. And
it's interesting that reverse polarity thing. I've seen that firsthand. 2 strings of 22, instead of connecting them in parallel, connect them in a big loop. And then someone says, oh, I know what I've done. And, no, don't touch it. Don't touch it. You've got to wait till the sun goes down to fix this. Otherwise, it's a 2,000 volt spark and it's a big problem. So obviously you've come across that firsthand, and it's not the first, and it won't be the last.
No. And look, that's a thing that I'm really strong on in the company, which is how do we respond to an issue? You're going to have issues. No one in the solar industry, no one in any industry is ever not going to have an issue. But it is how we respond, both with a client and with our suppliers and contractors. And that's what we've done really well. I mean, a good thing for me is money's not been a passion for me personally. Doing a great job has been. And so if there is a problem, I will throw money at it to the point where the customer's happy. If there's an issue, I don't care what it costs, let's get it fixed. And that's been a hallmark of our success.
I think you make a really good point, mate, because, I mean, everyone's obviously looking at a lot of solar companies are looking at commercial and saying, oh, here's an opportunity. I can make a ton of money off this project, and, I can get a half a megawatt or a megawatt or whatever installed in one go instead of doing a whole bunch of 6.6s. And it's a really, really attractive space. But, the consequences of this stuff going wrong mean that you really have to look at things differently. And, when I read about the Sydney Aquatic Centre fire and heard about the fact that it melted through the roof and that there were 1,500 kids in there at a swimming carnival at the time, it kind of reminded me of the serious consequences of what we're doing. And you cannot approach this stuff lightly. And, I think the experience that you're talking about and the sage advice that you're sharing there is that, shit's going to go wrong. And you have to build a mentality into your business to, do everything you can to mitigate those risks, but also accept that, even with the best people and the best of intentions, occasionally things are going to happen.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, just also grabbing onto your point earlier, Luke, about performance. We were the first guys in Australia to start matching interval data with sunlight and using, at that time, it was 15-minute interval data out of your meter. We would match it with 15-minute sunlight data, which we were interpolating from BOM. We developed a lot of our own tools, out of which we were the first ones to offer a performance guarantee, a system generation guarantee, because, a lot of our customers were getting quotes from Today Solar at the time. And Today Solar was notorious for giving 10% more sunlight than we could get out of our model. Like every time there's a challenge to, our numbers or the way that we do things, or there's some competition, competition is really healthy. It actually it made us innovate to develop new tools and new products and new ways of providing better solutions to our client. And so that in 2012, 13, we had that Trina panel backsheet shrinking delamination issue, a lot of warranties on that. We've installed over 200 megawatts of Trina, and we've had about 300 kilowatts of warranty. So they've dealt with it really well. But, it also means that we had to develop a monitoring platform that would transcend the inverter technologies, which we're so thankful when solar analytics came out, and we were able to start using that to monitor our systems and compare what we'd promised against what was actually happening on site. If I just step back and look at that history and taking maths very seriously with what we do, because all we're really doing is electrons and kilowatt hours are just mathematical problems, right? We're trying to solve a problem for our client, save them money, and help them improve their environmental scorecard. It's all maths. It's all calculable. It's all forecastable within a certain degree of accuracy. And it's also able to be checked. A good company will do that. A bad company will run and hide. Last week, I've got an off-grid system, a major guy, the guy actually who invented the CPAP machine, Dr. Shu Chan, awesome guy, really smart. We put in a very large off-grid system for his house, 100 kilowatts of sun power on a 250 kilowatt hour battery with maybe an 80 kVA generator backup.
To come and visit.
Yeah, don't at the moment. We've had a hell of a time. We've had a hell of a time with that. We used Alpha ESS, and the support levels have been woeful. After being back there several times, and we've spent huge amounts of money, about 80K, just in our own time and effort trying to fix this problem. But my contractor said to the customer just yesterday, he said, don't worry, Smart Commercial Solar will always fix their problem. I know you got a lot of problem, but they're not running away. They will never run away from their problem. And to have that being said by third parties on our behalf is very nice.
Did I hear correctly that you've got a system out there that you were going to come back to, which has 4 megawatt hours worth of batteries?
Yeah.
What was it like to commission that one?
Yeah, so this was a really, really cool project. I've been looking after the chicken industry, chicken growing industry for what's called broilers, which is the chicken that you eat, as opposed to the eggs. I've been looking after that industry for about 10 years now, and with the biggest chicken growers in Australia. This was a first of its kind because my customer, Daniel Bryant, he developed the biggest chicken grower in Australia and sold it for about 500 million in about 5 years ago to First State Super. He then, on his gardening leave, he went to New Zealand, became the biggest chicken grower in New Zealand, is now returning back to Australia. A big part of what he wants to do is become, I don't think it's right to call it green chicken. No one wants to eat green chicken, but he wants to be... I
love a Thai green curry, mate, just quietly.
We've been dabbling with them with solar and battery. We've done a few projects with them in New Zealand. And then he was able to buy cheap land in a remote area, so a massive saving on land, because we were able to build him an off-grid system that would power his chicken sheds. Every 9 weeks, he can grow 2 million chickens. He can do that on solar and battery. If he was to connect to the grid, it would cost him a few $1 million, and it would take about 2 years. We were able to get him power to start growing chickens within 7 months. We put in a 4 megawatt tracker using Ryzen bifacials on a FTC tracker, single axis tracker, feeding a SunGrow 4.4 megawatt hour or 2 times 2.2 megawatt hour batteries with a 1.6 megawatt of diesel generator backup. And that system's been designed to meet about 82% of all their energy needs with solar and battery. It's a really cool system. It's been a hell of a time. And this is what I've discovered about commercial scale batteries, particularly for behind the meter operations. The domestic batteries are pretty simple. They perform their function, they're regular, there's a lot of them. You know, they generally do what they're asked to do. Then the large, very large scale sort of grid feeding commercial batteries, which are purely for grid plays, also do what they're meant to do, but it's also not critical if they go down. In this mid-scale commercial section, which I operate predominantly and always behind the meter, it has been an incredibly complex, very steep learning curves because the technology isn't able to meet what the market's actually wanting. And so we're developing a lot of IP to make these batteries work. And manufacturers are releasing products that don't actually do what they say on the box. It's very frustrating. I was about to swear, but I know I'm probably on a PC podcast here.
Yeah, we don't swear on this podcast, mate.
Never swear.
Yeah, no.
It's funny you should bring it up because
yes.
we were at the iStore inverter factory in China, and we saw a couple of 2.2 megawatt hour packs at the factory, and that's exactly the sort of thing that you're talking about. So they're 100% available, but we've got no idea whether they work or not. They were shown to us as being operational, in use, providing whatever backup or peak shifting or whatever that was claimed, and it all looked absolutely awesome to us.
I mean, Simon Chiglinski from Power Plus addressed that, and he said the good manufacturers are always going to understate what the capacity is and the performance is so that they're going to sit within what they've stated.
Look, I mean, SunGrow is a good manufacturer. What the challenge is, and I think you'll find this true if you're walking around trade shows and you're trying to meet with engineers on this, commercial scale, or I call it mid-scale battery, where you're in the megawatt or 500 to multiple megawatts. But to find an engineer who truly understands what they're doing through the value stack of batteries is very hard. It's a very new industry. It's kind of like where solar was 15 years ago. We were all learning about the product, just like SunPower. SunPower released a product, and then 5 years later realized we've got to put in negative earthing or positive earthing kits because their panels were failing. I mean, they didn't predict that. But the battery manufacturers are also releasing products they don't fully understand. And every engineer is fresh out of uni, has no idea why a battery is important or how it's meant to be important. Like, it doesn't really matter which manufacturer we're talking about. I've pretty much found the whole industry's heaving with opportunity and struggling with comprehensive knowledge on their product.
This is pretty scary, Huon, when we hear that supplier A has just won a contract for 600 megawatts of batteries in WA, and we know full well that they've never installed anything like it before. That's some pretty scary feedback.
This is the industry, right? This is not unusual. Tesla's Hornsdale power plant did an amazing job. I would love to know what went on in the background to make that work. We've had our own struggles with Tesla. Being a very closed architecture, you don't really get to understand yourself as an expert in the field. You still don't get an inside look into what's happening at the back end of that battery. In a grid scale, grid connected, where you're not really backing up a load, okay, the risks are pretty low. So what? Your battery doesn't work. We've got time to swap it out. In an off-grid scenario, so we had one case in point, and I'm not throwing Sungrow on the bus in any means. You know, they've worked with us, and we've actually got a really stable system now. It ends up being something like 42 hours. So this system's programmed in VSG mode. The computers on the battery in the battery inverter was still looking for a grid every 42 hours because it didn't detect any reactive power coming from another source. It would just shut the battery down and 30 seconds start back up. Mate, we couldn't for the life of us work out what was going on. But when you have a look at the architecture of these batteries, you've got an engineering team in China who built a battery. Great, they built a great battery. Then on top of that, they put a little battery management system. And then on top of that, there's another computer, which is there to manage the various BMSs inside the stacks. And then on top of that, we've got our PCS. Then on top of that, we've got a microgrid controller, which we have to provide ourselves. So you've got 4 levels of control rather than direct control to each battery stack. And I think we're just in early days of this commercial battery market. I think that's all going to get cleaned up in the next 5 years. But in the meantime, it's people like us who are learning on the run and suffering the cost implications of doing that. We would have spent, maybe $80,000 just dealing with finding issues and running generators and dealing with the phone calls at 4 a.m. from the chicken farmer. But I do like these projects. They are the ones that get me up in the morning. They are what make it exciting to be part of this industry. And as we do something that's adventurous and that maybe hasn't been done before, like PPAs or like generation guarantees or many of the firsts that Smart's done, it's something that we learn, we then become good at, and then we have something real to offer the market. We've got a new product that we're going to bring to market, which is our own controller with our own logic, and we will tell the inverter what to do via Modbus, and we'll tell the generator what to do, and we'll have our own control system now.
So is that something you'd look to do going forward with your control system? Instead of having 4 layers of controls? Like you said, you're going to have your own controller for it.
Yeah, because I can't rely on the suppliers to back up their own product. And so I get
a heap of development behind that, though.
It's more software than it is hardware, and it's more logic than it is, and it's programming language directly into inverters. The problem is the logic isn't there because the engineers who are developing the logic for the manufacturer don't actually know why what they're doing is important.
I don't know. I think Janice would disagree. Ultimately, they've had a couple of truck fires now. The factory that we went to and the batteries that we looked at did have several levels of safety protection for those batteries. The level of complexity that needs to be there to support them, is more than meets the eye.
Now, while we're on batteries, I know that you're predominantly off-grid and commercial, but today there was an announcement that New South Wales government has a scheme now. It's going to come in on the 1st of November. So they made the rookie error, announced it very early, which means it's going to stall a lot of the battery sales. So Queensland government, at least,
Valley of Death coming right up.
Took the advice and said, we're just going to do a short period. New South Wales government has thrown the industry under the bus and said it's going to be 1st of November. It's somewhere between $1,600 and $2,400 for a battery system. It is significant, but in the scheme of the cost of a battery system, it's not huge. And there's also an incentive to join the VPP between $250 and $400. So I'm sure we'll get more details about this, but And just as another bit of background information, there were 57,000 batteries installed last year, and we're on track for around 70,000. That's according to SunWiz. Thanks, Warwick. My question to you is, do you think that state government-based rebates are effective?
Yeah, it was interesting as you were opening, talking about the dynamic control and EV chargers, and it reminded me of something I was talking about last week, which is, there's a lot of stick out there. There's a lot of reasons why increased energy costs, increased demand costs. There's a lot of reasons why not to do something, and increased standards and control systems being imposed by states and DNSPs. There's a lot of things that are trying to handbrake various things instead of offering really meaningful incentives. Retailers and networks are freaking out because their traditional business model is being hammered, right? And they're saying, well, if we're in pain, then the consumer should be in pain. Instead of saying, well, if we're in pain, let's incentivize the consumer to behave differently, as to your point, Nigel. There's a lot more stick than there is carrot. Why is off-peak still nighttime no longer? They should actually be shifting off-peak rates to the middle of the day. You want to incentivize business to manufacture in Australia? Manufacturers will return to Australia not because of government stimulus, but because the actual broad cost of energy is low, and therefore manufacturing in Australia is cheap. We're just not passing on the savings that have been made by renewables in the day. And I think this is also a symptom of having AGL and Origin as gentailers. It's Coles and Woolworths. They're dominating the market. They're manipulating the price. They're making massive profit in the middle of the day. They're not passing on the savings, and the consumers are still being hit with sticks like the Ausgrid penalty for feed-in of 1.4 cents. Well, yeah, cool, but why not just encourage people to use more power in the middle of the day? To answer your question, Luke, I didn't answer it, but I'm just basically not in favor of governments doing really blunt, object things. I think the best thing we've ever done in political world is the renewable energy target, which is long, slow, and ramped over time. I think that was a brilliant strategy. I think everything else that has sort of been done in the stimulation of this market has been fleeting, created bubbles, and a lot of pain when it bursts. I think that will be no different. It will open the door once again, as we've seen with every new rebate. There'll be a lot of cheap shit batteries coming into the market, promising to do what it said on the box, blowing up and burning on the side of the house. Because that's the type of people that get turned on when they see governments going in one direction. Yeah, so I'm just afraid of it.
Agreed, and we've seen exactly that happen recently in the ACT. So they had a rebate of several $1,000s to make efficiency improvements to your home, and effectively gets turned on for 18 months, 2 years. They turn it off, and everybody's solar businesses collapse overnight. And no one wants that for the industry. We want stability. If it's slow and steady, that's a better solution than some kind of crazy busy followed by nothing and going broke. That's just nuts.
You mentioned the ugly collapse word, and I think there hasn't been an episode for the last probably 2 months where we haven't had to go, oh, geez, there's another one gone. And this week, sad news, speaking of collapses, of Solar Depot going under. Solar Depot started out in Adelaide. In fact, I met the founder, Troy Ryan, probably better part of 25 years ago. He was assembling solar-powered street lights in the back of a factory in the backlots of Adelaide as an apprentice, along with another apprentice called Adrian Ferrado, who most of you would know, who went on to found Solar Shop, and they both went on and created fantastic legacies and businesses. And a real shame to see Troy's business closed down. He'd expanded up the East Coast and done all sorts of things. But clearly, there are signs out there that, things are not easy. So, yeah, real shame.
And it's some of those long-standing companies too. That's the most concerning thing. If you have a newer business that doesn't have the processes, hasn't built their market, doesn't have strong referrals coming through the pipeline, then that happens. That's unfortunate, but it does happen. But when you see these established businesses and semi-regularly falling over, we know that times are tough and cost of living is hard and cost of business is up too. But it's disappointing, as you say, Nigel.
Really disappointing. And I won't give away some of the rumors that I've heard because I don't know that they're true, but I've been digging around with a number of these recent collapses and trying to get the backstory behind what the reasons were. And not a single one of them are the same, right? So there are unique circumstances associated with each one of these collapses. So there's a broader underlying issue of things being tough and everything else, but there are unique factors in every one of these recent collapses, which is just mind blowing to me. It shows the diversity of issues that businesses have got to face.
We're going to be wrapping up soon, but normally, Huon, we do ask our guests to share on their personal side of life. So obviously a person like you has been very busy for many years, building this great business, running this great business. So how do you find personal balance, or what do you do outside of work to keep yourself straight and level?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got 4 kids, 10, 9, 7, and 5. So life, the real life, as I call it, is very busy. There's sport every night. There's sport on the weekends. Personally, I love water skiing and snow skiing if I get the chance. And then I've got the business as well. And we try and squeeze in some relationship time with my wife, Catherine, and a social life somewhere in there as well as I go to a church as well. So life's pretty hectic. The best thing I can say I've done is employ great people. Max, my general manager, Johnny, my sales manager, Catherine, my wife, CFO, and a whole bunch of my whole team, really. That allows me to drop the kids off at 8:30 at the bus, get into the office at 9:30 or 10 o'clock or whatever, and leave whenever. So I'm not super intense at the office. My wife and I work at home at night to just catch up on things. And really, I do struggle when I hear people struggling with their business and taking on more than they can handle in order to keep their businesses running. I just think that's poor management. Our job as business owners is to build structures around us so that the business doesn't need us. Whilst that can be challenging because you may not feel like you can find the right people, you might not be able to find the right people. You have to develop them. And that's what we've done really well. We give people an opportunity. We let them grow into it. We advance them before they're ready. We don't take something off the shelf and say, well, you're perfect and you're fit. We say, okay, well, you're not ready, but we're going to help you grow into the role if you're willing to. And in that way, we've got a business that's quite robust and doesn't need me to be here every day. And then, last year we took off 6 or 7 weeks to go via Intersolar and then travel Europe with the whole family, which is an amazing moment. It was the first time really in my career over the last 12 years that we could take a proper extended family holiday. I think my work-life balance is pretty good at the moment. There's always challenges when it comes to relationships to make time for them. I think I would like to make more time just to spend with my wife because it's pretty hard between work and 4 kids. In lieu of that, maybe I can just remind her that I love her more often than I think it. I should actually say it out loud. Other than that, the rest is just management.
Just want to say thanks for coming on. And you can always tell when it's a good episode because you feel that we could keep sitting here and talking. So I hope in the future we'll continue the conversation. Before we do wrap it up, I'll just whip around to everyone for any last comments, and we'll start with Karl.
I just wanted to know if Huon is the Wolverine as his extra spare job after the husband and family man and business owner.
Quick answer.
Only on full moon nights.
And Nigel, do you have any last comments?
Yeah, I've known Huon for a long time, and I only learned tonight as we were getting ready to come on air that Huon in Chinese actually means unfathomable, which I think is a wonderful description because every time I talk to Huon, I learn something new. And mate, I really admire what you've achieved and what you've done. We've had some wonderful chats over the years.
Likewise.
And keep on keeping on, mate.
And Huon, last comments.
Yeah, look, I appreciate all that you guys do. You and a whole bunch of other great people in this industry. Like, I go to a lot of other trade shows out of other industries. This industry is breeding and has bred and still contains people like the people in this room and the people that we get to meet at every other industry event. Just genuinely good people. I as you say, Luke, I could do this forever. I could sit and talk to you for a long, long time because I appreciate what you guys have to say, and I think these podcasts are a big part of industry growing together, and remembering as well that we've got a shared challenge, shared opportunities, shared goals, and shared struggles. Yeah, that's a great thing to remember. Thank you.
Well, thanks again for coming on. So Huon Hoogesteger from Smart Commercial Solar. It's been great to have you on, mate, and look forward to seeing what you do in the future. And thanks to our listeners as well. Just a reminder that if you can jump on socials and like or follow our pages, that helps us get in front of more people. And we'll catch you next time.